All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Jason Leva here with the Fort Worth Community Arts Center, and we would like to welcome you to another edition of our Boxed Lunch program, this week focusing again on our original work series. We have another fabulous script coming up this Thursday, and we would like to welcome the author of that script, the one and only Lori Isbell. Did I say that right, Lori?
Yes, Isbell.
Nice. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I am doing just as well, I believe, and very excited to have an opportunity to chat with you. And again, so very grateful for you submitting this wonderful script. Now, Lori, before we get into too many details about all of that, do you mind taking a moment and just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. Well, I am a writer and at times have been a teacher of writing. I grew up here in the Fort Worth, Dallas area, even went to TCU. In my early years, I lived in Dallas in Deep Ellum. And then I had 25 years when I went away for some adventures in the world. And I lived in New York, in LA, Arizona, most recently in Colorado. And then last year, just before the lockdowns and the pandemic began, I put plans in motion to move back to Texas. And just as that was starting to happen again, the pandemic happened, and I persevered. So I made it to Texas for the pandemic starting last spring, and am so glad to be back and reestablishing connections in Fort Worth and Dallas with family, friends, and the larger arts community. So thank you, Jason, and to the Arts Council for inviting me to be part of this conversation today and allowing me to share my play, Fun World, which I certainly wrote about Texas and about all of my Texas family, even when I was living elsewhere.
Wow. Well, we're so glad to have you, and welcome home, I guess. And hopefully eventually you'll be able to maybe even venture out of your house and see what's changed since last time you were here.
Right. It's been such a strange time for everyone. I know we have all of these big things playing out in the sort of the larger dramas of the world. We have the pandemic, we've had political upheaval and protests for equality and conversations about race and elections. And recently this spring, we had snowstorms and power outages. So all of these big dramas are playing out. And then in a small personal way, I've been re-entering this world, this place of Fort Worth, Dallas, and my home here. And it's been a returning home, and yet it's also been starting anew. I'm certainly a different person 25 years later than I was when I left. And I have returned here with a partner and husband. And he's not from Texas, so he is seeing things for the first time. And we are trying to explore in small ways all that Fort Worth, Dallas, and Texas is. And he's certainly taken a liking to the barbecue so far. He's a natural. So, yeah.
Wow. And he's got to experience some things that we may never experience again in Texas. So welcome to the Lone Star State, I guess.
Right.
And yes, definitely. I think barbecue is more of a highlight than snowstorms. Hopefully we won't have many more of those. And we'll hopefully always have a plethora of some good barbecue down here. So
that's right. And we had just been living in Colorado. And so when we got to Texas last year, we imagined that we would never be unpacking some of our fuzzy hats and sweaters, but we definitely pulled them out. They became very useful this spring.
Yeah, that is putting it mildly, for sure. So speaking of barbecue, Lori, what's on your lunch menu today?
Well, the answer to the question is what will be on a little bit later this afternoon. You see behind me an unusually clean kitchen, but in a few minutes it will be plunged back into disarray. And I'm going to be making a soup, a chicken soup with the sort of vegetable leftovers that one has now and then. So it will be a everything in the pot kind of soup.
Awesome. A little hobo stew, maybe. Is that what you
Right.
call
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll talk about some of those ingredients, and maybe you can let us in on a little bit of how you prep that stuff and get that ready for what I'm sure is a very warm and soul-filling goodness of some wonderful soup. So, I'm going to go with an old classic today, since we are heading to a location that I know very well. So I don't want to give too much away before we start talking about the show, but I'm going with a good old fashioned boiled hot dog today. And I'll be adding a little side dish of some good classic Lay's potato chips to that. So I'm gonna I'm gonna turn my stove on, boil some water, and get ready to throw this dog in there. So while I'm
Great.
doing that, Lori, I've got a question for you. Do you mind talking a little bit about how has your playwriting been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I would say my playwriting has been interrupted, like many other things in life, in that in the past year, as I said, I made the move to Texas and I accepted a new full-time corporate writing job.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've really spent much of this past year readjusting to life here, all the challenges that we're all facing, and learning that particular job. So I haven't taken a lot of time to do writing, and I've missed it. I can feel that loss of writing time. So I'm hoping that as we move deeper into 2021, I can find a better balance where I have more of a consistent writing practice, waking up in the morning and working more steadily. The play that we're going to talk about today, Fun World, is one that I finished before the pandemic started. So I hope to now move on to some other projects and get back to work.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know a lot of people may not realize this, but submissions for the original work series this year was actually back in the fall of 2020. So I was curious, had you totally finished that show, or were you in the midst of wrapping it up as the pandemic had started?
I had really finished that as far as I could get it without more of a reading and a real production, because as we know, once those things happen, then you learn more things about your own show. Things start to reveal themselves in the work. So I had what I considered a mostly finished draft until I could share it with an audience and get to what might be uh, a later evolution of that story and of that play. And even as I was looking back over it this morning in preparation for our conversation today, I was seeing things that I hadn't looked at in a while. And I was thinking, oh, okay, that's something I want to think about. That's something I'm going to play up or play down. It's like maybe a piece of music where you start to play with the knobs a little bit, go up and down or faster here, slow it down. So I look forward to the experience of hearing it performed and then knowing what I want to do next.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to share it with everyone, and absolutely can't wait for people to get a chance to experience it. So I'm also curious, as a writer, I heard you mention just a little bit ago about all of these things that the world has had to experience. As a playwright, do you consider yourself someone who writes from the outside stimulation in, or are your stories more inward outward? Do you see the things that are going on in the world and think they need to be uh, addressed by you, or are your stories more personalized and come more from the effects of the things that are happening around you?
That's a good question. I think it's a combination. In the case of Fun World, that is a personal story. I wrote it thinking about my mother and the experience of my family. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about what the play involves in a moment. So the initial inspiration came from a personal story, but it's a story that I think has some resonance with other families, with a lot of other people who are dealing with aging, with Alzheimer's, and with caretaking in general. So that particular project really started from the personal, but the play that I have been working on since then is a little bit larger. It's a critique of higher education, academia. I spent much of my professional career teaching, and I did love it, but I saw a lot of commercialization, corporatization of the college world. And about 3 years ago, I resigned from my full-time teaching position. Um, and and yet I wanted to write a play that spoke to my outrage, my heartbreak at what I see as some of the the decay, the diminishment of what education can really be. Education has always meant a lot to me. I grew up, as I said, in the Fort Worth, Dallas area. It was a small town. I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to TCU as a first generation college student. It completely changed my life and put me on a different trajectory. Um, and gave me so many more opportunities than my parents had, especially my mother. And so I think the college experience can be life changing, and unfortunately we've turned it into something more of a retail experience than a soul changing experience.
Yeah.
So back to your question, it's a combination. Sometimes my stories are personal, and sometimes they speak to the larger world.
Gotcha. I find it so interesting, some of the things that you're saying. I'm real curious, and I know you said you haven't been teaching for a while, but I'm still really interested to know, as a former educator, and not to put you too much on the spot, what is your feelings and thoughts on education in the pandemic? The challenge to open schools, virtual versus in person. What's your take on what you're seeing in the educational world as they face these challenges that they're struggling with now?
I think it's tragic. As a college educator, I taught mostly freshman writing classes, some creative writing or literature, but mostly I was working with beginning students and often at a community college. So I was really teaching the kind of students that I was, that is a first generation college student who is arriving to this unfamiliar world of academia. And I always chose to teach in person rather than teaching online because I knew that I could make a more profound connection and difference in students' lives. I still believe that is more possible with in-person education than with online education. We need online, and it can serve some functions, and it can work maybe especially well for some students who really thrive in that environment for whatever reason. But for the large majority, that being in a classroom environment and having the presence of a real instructor and knowing that that instructor knows your name, knows your life, your story, and is having conversations with you, not just as a group, but also one on one individually, is an amazingly powerful thing. And that's one of the things that I regret that higher education is turning away from. It's all about, oh, well, we're going to be more efficient and we're going to expand the reach and we're going to do this and that. Well, yes, and that benefits institutions more than it does students. So my heart is with all of those students out there and the teachers in the classrooms who are not getting to be in their rightful place. That is, together, doing the hard, messy, difficult work that is teaching and learning.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, as a writer, is that why you leaned into playwriting as opposed to screenwriting? Do you feel the same importance with theater as opposed to film, or do you write screenplays as well, and that just happens to be what you're doing now as playwriting?
I I entered playwriting by accident. I applied to a graduate program at Arizona State, and my area of emphasis was going to be nonfiction prose. I was going to be an essayist, and I was in love with my, like many young people. And yet I got there, and the program had been disbanded. So my advisor says, you can choose fiction or you can choose poetry. And I said, I don't know, I'm not sure. And my advisor says, well, we have a brand new playwriting teacher over there in theater, and we don't have enough bodies in his class. Could you just go be a playwright for a semester? And I said, well, okay. And I went over there, and the teacher's name was Jim Leonard. He was fantastic. And I learned through playwriting that it didn't have to be just my voice. I learned to love creating the voices of all of my characters. And one of the first successful things I wrote, because I struggled, I struggled as a young playwright, was finding characters and voices from Texas. I started to remember the sound of my father's voice, my cousins, my friends, that sort of Texas twanginess that I don't speak with any longer much of the time, but back then I really did. And I started bringing Texas stories to my teacher and to my fellow playwrights, and things started to happen. And that's the story of how I found playwriting. And I experimented a little bit with script writing. I had a student in a creative writing class many years later in Los Angeles who wanted to be a screenwriter. He didn't quite have the experience to be a screenwriter, so he gave me a rough draft of a script. It was a teen vampire angst horror show. He asked me to rewrite it, and he was going to film it. And I said, well, okay. And he and I worked on it. It was a full-length film, and he did make that film, and
Wow,
it got all the way to Sundance. So
nice.
I got to go to Sundance and see my vampire film. And I was extremely proud of my student. His name was Roger Ingram. And it was a great experience, but I'm probably a playwright at heart.
Nice. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what's the name of the film? Is it available on DVD or Blu-ray or rental or?
You might find it on some arcane YouTube channel. The name is Moonshine. Um,
Woo!
and yeah, like I said, it was a teen vampire show with a lot of small town existential angst and depression and despair. And I give him a lot of credit. I think he made it with a sum total of $6,000, just
Wow.
with a bunch of friends in
Bravo.
Connecticut. Um, that was, and it was an adventure for me too. I was, as I said, living in Los Angeles, and we went back and forth, and he made it happen. So cheers
Wow.
to Roger, wherever you are.
What a great story. That's absolutely incredible. And there's so much truth to one phrase you said in particular about over there in theater.
Right.
I don't know what it is, but it always seems as though the theater people are always over there.
Right. And in that theater department, there were people without traditional degrees. My playwriting teacher, he did not have a graduate degree, but he was bestowing graduate degrees on the rest of us. There was one of the directors down the hall had never been to college. He was just, a New York guy. So it was a great experience. I wasn't that closely connected to the theater world in high school or undergraduate. So when I, threw myself into the lot with the theater folks in graduate school, it was just a whole new world. And I found myself, I went to some theater, for example. I grew up going to Casa Manana in Fort Worth, like many people, and the Hip Pocket Theater, things like that. But it's really been since then that I've been awakened to more, more, more opportunities to see theater and do theater and give my time and energy in whatever way I can. And when I was living in Colorado just recently, I worked with a couple of small theater groups there who were kind enough to do my work, and I got to make some new friends there.
Awesome. Well, we're certainly glad
So,
to have you here
theater
in the
people.
theater world. So, so Lori, do you mind telling us just a little bit about your submission this year?
Sure. The play is called Fun World, and I give you credit, Jason, for making your hot dog and being in the spirit of the play. It takes place in an amusement park that is based on Six Flags. I think people will recognize it. And it really concerns a group of women. There are 4 women who know each other from teaching in an elementary school somewhere in Texas. The story really focuses on 2 of those 4 women. They've recently retired from their teaching jobs. They're mid to late 60s, and they're in a place where they're thinking about this closing of part of their lives where they have been teachers and caretakers, and imagining what their lives are going to be like now in this next phase of life. And we are going to learn that the central character, Jenny, is dealing with much more than that, much more than just her retirement and moving into this different part of her life. Her husband, we learn, has Alzheimer's. And so she is learning how to really endure that, and is feeling isolated, overwhelmed, as is very common. And she and her friend rival Louise, they've always butted heads in their small life in their elementary school. But in this day at the amusement park, through a series of hijinks and misadventures, they're going to come together. So the story has some serious moments as they talk about these serious things, but I think it's a comedy at heart, and I hope that I brought some warmth and some insight to these characters and that people can really connect with them.
Yeah, I certainly think that's very evident. I find it always so interesting when I have the opportunity to read stories. And one of the things that I really loved about this script in particular was a lot of the juxtapositions of location and people. So and not to give, I don't want to give spoilers away till people have had a chance, but there are some things that I obsess about when I read shows, and I really love the juxtaposition of the theme park environment that is really never defined with a roller coaster. And what I really found so interesting, in my mind, Alzheimer's is reaching and trying to find descriptive qualities for these vague memories and things. So I really love the way that you create the atmosphere with sounds and lighting and nuances. And I thought that was really, really interesting to be able to take such a large, grand scale location. And then maybe I'm reading too much into it, but the juxtaposition also of some of the things that the characters are dealing with. And I love the way that the environment is almost a memory as well that they're kind of moving through. So I really did enjoy some of those descriptive qualities in the way you use such a grand location in such a sensory oriented way. So it was really interesting to see the way that those scenes play out and how the environment is substantiated by a lot of those audio and sensory components. So it was really a nice twist on the location for sure.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And when I first thought about setting a play in an amusement park, I knew that that might be challenging for any theater that might even consider producing it, like an amusement park. How could we, replicate that? So it was important to me that I create the world with the sound, maybe a lighting here and there. We have an unusual character who appears at some point. Um, so we imagine the theme park. We kind of, as audience members, we fill in the blanks of where the lights and the rides and the chaos is going to be. And I liked the juxtaposition of this world of the theme park. It's sort of chaotic and circusy and garish. Um, and I think it connects to the experience of Jenny's husband, who probably experiences everyday life exactly like that, where things are strange and disorienting, and one gets lost in the noise and the phantasmagoria. So I wanted to get a lot of use out of the setting without trying to reproduce the setting on the stage, so that we could really just focus in with those characters and their stories.
Yeah, I think you certainly succeeded with that. The other thing that I really like too, when you talk about, opposites, if you will, I love the fact of that whole kind of fish out of water and watching these ladies work through the environmental challenges and the things that are there as well, along with the fact that a lot of people perceive theme parks to be a youthful place. Now, age is all in your mind anyway, but that was another really fun little dynamic of the I'll call them experienced ladies in such a perceived youthful environment of what I think most people would consider children, teens, and things like that in that environment. So just another really really nice choice to be able to put those hurdles in front of your characters and allow them to not only have to deal with each other and the uh, uh, challenges that they face amongst one another, but also that dynamic of what they're trying to deal with in that world as well. So really great job.
Well, thank you. And when I was writing this play, imagining these women in their 60s, I had not yet crossed the threshold of 50 myself. And so I imagined, oh, these are much older women. But now I have crossed that threshold, and I am sporting my silver hair, and I feel a little bit more connected to these characters. And I I did want it to be a world of this theme park in which they were not exactly welcome. Um, and I think that comes through in the story. And these are former teachers. They've spent their whole lives caring for youth and bandaging those scraped knees and wiping the mouths and teaching the ABCs and all of those things. And here they are in a world that is once again imagined to be for children, this theme park. And they are not exactly embraced during their time there. And I think that's an experience that many older people have, and perhaps older women. You reach a certain age and you don't know when it happened, but all of a sudden you are just not as accepted as you once were, or accepted for your true age and status in the world. So that it sort of resonates with me more now that I'm a little bit older and closer in age to my characters. And I want to say one more thing about the characters. I was inspired by my mother and her caretaking of my father, and his struggle with Alzheimer's. And I I have some moments in the play where the two older women talk about what it is to be an older woman in Texas, and they talk about the fact that somehow the feminist revolution never quite got here, or never got to the smaller towns in Texas where they spent their lives. and they imagine, if they wonder how things may have been different. And I think about that for my mother, who just turned 80. Late happy birthday, Mom. And the women of her generation who just got to the party a little too late. So it's for them.
You know, I really think there's a lot to be said for you writing a story and hitting that demographic. And not only, I don't want to say catering to it, that's not the right word, but what I love is the way you showcase that specific demographic in an environment that is different from theirs. And I think it's really, really inspiring the way that you were not only able to write older characters, which I don't believe there's enough of, but also the way that you allow them to face some truthful challenges, not necessarily just in that specific environment, but finding their way, finding their place, and working out some of those real true to life issues. And I know you say it's a comedy overall, but there are some really poignant moments in there, and I think it's
Thank you.
a really nice balance that obviously is something that I think has some value in being able to make the funnier parts more funny, and then having the serious parts really hit home when they need to. So really nice balance, and I mean that overall in the demographic and the location and all of that. It's got a lot of really good points to be able to play off one another. So I'm just very encouraged for everybody to get a chance to hear it, and we certainly look forward to sharing it with everyone. So Lori, you talked a little bit about how some of the characters were based on real people. Is that normal for you? Do you always write and mirror experiences you've had, or I often ask playwrights, do you have other voices in your head that you're just trying to put on a piece of paper? How does your process normally play out, or is it really dependent on the story for you?
I always start with a voice, and whether I'm writing a play or a piece of short fiction, sometimes I experiment in that world too, but it's always a character and a voice, and I hear that character say something, sort of enter into the world a little bit, and I follow where that character leads, as hokey as that sounds. And I write a little bit with that character, and before I know it, that character is speaking to another character, and then I've got two people in the room, and I start to build. And my playwriting teacher always encouraged me to, especially at the beginning, just to follow the characters, let them go, let them talk. If they want to go to the grocery store, they went to Las Vegas, wherever they're going, just hang on for the ride. And then to you use those voices and the dialogue to figure out, well, what is it that I'm getting to or I'm saying. And then sometimes the subconscious can guide us, and I can look down at my work and realize, oh, that's what I'm trying to talk about. That's where the story is going. And then I can take a step back and impose some order and think about structure, etc. But I love to hear the voices of characters wherever and however they show up. And I know that the test of whether or not I want to write a full play is really how much time I want to spend with these people. How much do they have to say? And sometimes they are based on real people, and other times I'm taking more freedoms. I've got another play that I would love to be working on right now, where I'm going to make the primary character a male rather than a female, which is a little bit different for me. Usually I write plays about friend groups, but this play will be about family. So I have to say, Jason, being able to sit here and talk about it with you makes me want to go to my desk and get back to writing.
Well, good. That's what we're here for, is to encourage and inspire and make sure that we're doing all we can to keep people engaged with the arts, for sure.
You are, and thank you again to you and to the Fort Worth Arts Council and making all of these things possible. I'm just so grateful to be able to have this conversation and talk about Fun World. And I hope that this week some more people get to meet those characters and hear their stories and voices. They can tell the story at this point better than I can.
Awesome. Well, listen, the best thing I can do is to wrap this up and get you to the writing table so we can get another story out of you. So, Lori, before I plate and show you my wonderful presentation here, do you mind just taking a real quick, brief minute and explaining to us your process for your wonderful homemade soup?
My homemade soup is based on watching my mother and my grandmother cook soups all of my young life. I think there's a great tradition of home cooking here in Texas. How can you improve on that? So I'm going to start with a real live whole bird and get it in there. Plenty of salt, lots of herbs, little extra bit of butter just to keep things smooth. So, and just the usuals, the potatoes, the carrots, the green beans. I like to go for some cilantro and parsley in there. So yeah, making soup is sort of like a meditative process. It's 2 hours where you just futz about the kitchen with your little knives and your spoon, and I think about my family and my mom.
Well, it sounds like a great way to spend some time. Will you do me a favor? Once you're finished, will you take a picture of it and put it on the comments here on the chat thread so we can all come back and have an opportunity to see what it is you brought to life in that beautiful kitchen you got there?
Thank you. I would be thrilled to do that. Sure. Will do.
Awesome. Lori, this is probably one of the most important questions I'm going to ask you today. How and where can people find you and keep up with all of the great work that you've got going on?
I do have a website, loriisbell.com. I don't have a lot of my creative projects on there, but they can see me there. I have an email there. They can take a look at some of the work I've done in the past. So I would invite people to be in touch, especially if they have some comments about the play once they get to see it on Thursday. So yeah, that's where you can find me. And I hope that you'll be able to find me at a lot of in-person productions when we all get out of this lockdown and can be together again.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
All right, Lori, you ready? Well, welcome to my fun plate, direct from the Fun World hot dog stand right there. So
Excellent.
Cheese, little boiled hot dog, some classic mustard, and of course the classic Lay's chips. Lori, it has been an absolute pleasure to visit with you. Any final words of wisdom or encouragement for people out there?
My thanks again to you, Jason, and the Fort Worth Arts Council, and I hope people love and embrace Fun World.
Good enough. All right, folks, join us this Thursday, and we'll be back next Monday with another episode of Box Lunch. On behalf of all of us here at the Arts Center, please stay safe, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and that wraps up another episode. Bon appetit, everybody. We'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.